Few people ever talk about what happened after the body of Jesus was taken down from the cross. We all know the gospel accounts, the last words of the Master, the darkness that covered the earth, the tearing of the temple veil. But what about after? When the crowd dispersed and silence fell over Jerusalem, what became of those who remained? There is an ancient and forgotten tradition, whispered through apocryphal writings and the faith of early Christians, that takes us into a night filled with mystery. A night when Mary Magdalene walked alone, retracing the steps of sorrow, seeking something she herself could not yet name. And what she discovered during that midnight walk would forever transform her faith and ours. Mary Magdalene was unlike the others. While many fled, she stayed until the end, at the foot of the cross. Her heart was broken, but her devotion was stronger than fear. When Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus laid Jesus' body in the tomb, most of the others went home. But Mary could not simply lie down and wait for the Sabbath to pass. Something within her burned, a flame that compelled her to search, to linger, to remain near the one who had changed her life forever. And so, that very night, between tears and silence, she began her journey. It was not just a walk through the narrow streets of Jerusalem. It was grief turned into pilgrimage. As if by retracing each step of Jesus, Mary hoped to stitch together the meaning of what seemed impossible to understand. Her first stop was the Garden of Gethsemane. The place still seemed soaked with the agony of the previous night, when Jesus prayed until his sweat fell like drops of blood. Mary knelt beneath the ancient olive trees, touched the ground, and let her tears fall into the dust. In that quiet moonlight, she felt the weight of his solitude, and she whispered softly, "I am here, Master. Even if all slept, even if all fled, I am here." From there, she followed the path through the narrow, shadowed streets. Every stone seemed to echo the memory of that dreadful day. She could almost hear again the cries of the crowd, the blows of the soldiers, the dragging of the cross along the ground. At every corner, her heart throbbed as if reliving the darkest hours of her life. When she reached one of the places where, according to tradition, Jesus had stumbled beneath the weight of the cross, Mary paused. She placed her hand on the cold stone and prayed. But she did not pray only for him. She prayed for those who condemned him, for those who mocked, for those who turned away. She remembered his words, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And with all the strength she had left, she tried to extend that same forgiveness through her prayer. Step by step, tear by tear, Mary made her way to Golgotha. The hill now lay empty, but still scarred by death. The smell of blood still lingered in the air. She sat in the same place where only hours earlier she had watched the life drain from the one who had given her everything. The ground was hard, cold, and silent. But inside her, grief burned like fire, and there, in that heavy silence, something began to stir. Mary felt she was not entirely alone. The night wind seemed to carry ancient whispers, and a mysterious presence enveloped her. Apocryphal writings say that on that night, Mary did not merely weep. She saw, she heard, she was visited. But before I reveal what happened, let me ask you, have you ever walked alone through a dark night, burdened by pain, not knowing if hope would ever come again? If so, then you understand exactly what Mary endured that night. Seated at Golgotha, Mary closed her eyes. The chill of the night cut through her bones, but something greater warmed her soul. And then it began. Visions, not dreams, not illusions, but spiritual encounters that early traditions would preserve as echoes of a deeper truth. Suddenly, before her appeared the figure of Abraham, the patriarch, the one who had once lifted the knife over his son Isaac, drew near and said, "Mary, do not be afraid of the sacrifice of the Son of God. I once carried the anguish of surrendering my beloved child. Yet the Lord showed me his promise was greater than fear. What was only a shadow in my life has now been fulfilled in fullness. The true Lamb has been offered, not for eternal death, but for everlasting life." A shiver ran through Mary's body. It was as if all of Israel's history bowed before the sacrifice of the cross. Then another figure emerged, Moses, his face glowing as though it still reflected the glory of Sinai. he spoke. "Daughter, remember how the people wandered in the wilderness, surrounded by serpents, hunger, and thirst, and yet the Lord brought us to the promised land. So too now, through the death of the righteous one, comes a greater deliverance, not from Egypt's slavery, but from the chains of sin itself." Each word pierced her heart like fire. These were not empty images, but voices from eternity breaking into her grief, confirming that what had happened on Calvary was not meaningless tragedy, but divine plan. And then came the most mysterious moment of all. In the silence of that night, Mary felt a presence unlike the others, intimate, unmistakable. Suddenly a gentle voice filled her soul. It was not Abraham. It was not Moses. It was him. She lifted her eyes, and there stood the Master, not yet in flesh but in spirit, radiant as she had never seen before. Mary fell to her knees, tears pouring without restraint. And Jesus said, "Woman, why do you weep? You are not alone in this night. My death was not defeat but victory. Life has triumphed. Love has triumphed. And you, Mary, have been chosen to carry this testimony in your heart. This revelation was not a hidden code or secret doctrine to lock away, but a truth so profound it could scarcely be put into words." Mary realized that love is stronger than death, that the cross was not an ending but a passage, that the resurrection was not an accident, but destiny from the beginning. That is why on Sunday morning she would be the first to run to the tomb, not merely out of loyalty, but because the certainty of resurrection had already been planted in her heart during that midnight walk. As she walked back through Jerusalem's deserted streets, her grief was no longer the same. The pain was still real, but it had been transformed into hope. Every tear had become a seed watered for faith to bloom. And now, let me ask you, how many times have you lived your own dark night, convinced it was the end, until suddenly something greater touched your soul and gave you strength to keep walking? Mary's story is our story. Each of us has moments when sorrow crushes us, when questions have no answers. But it is precisely in those moments that God often speaks the loudest, not with easy solutions, but with revelations that change everything. So if this story has already touched you, I invite you to do something. Write in the comments the name of someone who is walking through their own night of sorrow right now. Let us pray together, just as Mary prayed in the stillness of that night. For sometimes the prayer of one heart can ignite the faith of many. When Mary finished her midnight walk, she was no longer the same woman who had left her home. The weight of the cross was still etched in her memory. The sorrow of loss still burned within her, but a new certainty had been born. Love had not been defeated. She had walked with tears, but returned with hope. Back in her room, there were no easy answers, no visible proofs. The body of Jesus still lay in the tomb, yet in her soul something had shifted. A new faith had taken root, strong enough to prepare her for the impossible. This preparation would be essential on Sunday morning. When Mary ran to the tomb and saw the stone rolled away, she did not panic. When she found the body gone, she did not despair. Her night of prayer and silence had already trained her heart to recognize that the extraordinary was unfolding. And when Jesus finally stood before her in the garden, alive, radiant and victorious, Mary was ready. Not only ready to see him, but to recognize him and proclaim, "I have seen the Lord." Her midnight walk had been, in truth, a rehearsal for resurrection. This tradition reminds us of something profound. The greatest miracles often come to those who refuse to give up the search, even in the darkness. Mary did not resign herself to despair. She walked, she prayed, she sought. And in her silent searching, she received the revelation that made her the first witness of Easter. Now think for a moment. How many times have you endured your own dark night? How many times did everything feel lost? A grief, a betrayal, an illness, a fear greater than your strength. It is in those moments that Mary's walk speaks to us most powerfully. She does not teach us to deny pain, but to walk through it. She does not teach us to escape silence, but to remain there until God's voice breaks through. We live in a world full of noise, distractions, and haste. Yet Mary Magdalene's midnight journey reminds us of the sacred value of contemplative silence. Alone on the empty streets of Jerusalem, she found what no shouts of the crowd could give her: meaning. Perhaps that is what many of us need: the courage to pause, to be still, to let God speak in the solitude of our own nights. Her story also teaches us that true faith is not the absence of questions, but the courage to carry them before God. Mary did not have every answer in that midnight hour, but she had love, and it was love that kept her standing, love that carried her to the Garden of Resurrection. And now, let me speak directly to you. Maybe you are living through your own Good Friday, your own Golgotha. Maybe everything feels lost, but remember this: Mary's night was long, but it was not eternal. Sunday came, and it will come for you too. If this message has touched your heart, I invite you to write in the comments, "Love is stronger than death." Let us flood this space with hope, proclaiming together the truth that sustained Mary in her darkest hour. And if you want to continue receiving reflections like this, subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs light in their darkness. Because sometimes a single word can begin a whole new journey of faith. The secret walk of Mary is not just an ancient tale. It is a living testimony that still echoes today. Even in the darkest night, there is always a light that guides our steps, and that light never goes out.